It's a little bit different than yesterday. We're going to start with an industry professional panel where Hannah Karp from Billboard, formerly the Wall Street Journal, will be the moderator for each of the three panelists. She'll spend half an hour talking to each panelist. The first panelist is Marc Geiger from William Morris Entertainment, and the format is they'll come up. We'll give Marc an opportunity to make some introductory remarks if he would like. Entirely up to him. He can think of them on his way up to the stage.
Happy to be here.
We're delighted Marc is here. And then Hannah will ask Marc some questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience to ask some more academic type questions. So at that, why don't I hand it over to Hannah. Thanks very much to both of you for participating.
So we're all here for Alan. Alan asks, we jump.
So Marc, is this the best of times or the worst of times for the music business from your perspective as an agent?
It's neither. It's coming out of 20-year disrupted, what was seen as the worst of times, where the industry really participated to help make it the worst of times. And it's crawling out of its second revenue chasm on its way to being the best of times. And so if you actually measure it against worldwide revenue, in the old days when CDs were peaking, you're not close to where it was, right? But if you're tracking kind of the growth of music revenue, publishing and recorded music and streaming, it probably goes to somewhere between $100 billion to $200 billion industry, which will be a 2.5 to 6x or 5x of what it was at its peak. So we're on the way to the best of times.
2.5 to
5 times the overall revenue at peak times,
which was 2000.
Whatever year was peak, which they said was 38 billion.
And that's just recorded.
It's just recorded. In other ancillary businesses, and I work in one of them, touring as an example, we're up 300% over 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. So it's the best of times in that industry. But you have to understand the reason that is because the distribution of music was out there, it just wasn't paid, right? So everybody in this room has grown up on SoundCloud, YouTube, and many, many other platforms where they could get a lot of music and consume fairly easily, maybe not as organized the system as a Spotify or Apple Music or what have you, but you could do it, right? So that had an impact on all the other industries before they started to monetize.
Right.
So it's going to be huge, and I've said it for years.
When do you see it getting to that level?
You know, it's hard to tell. There's a few waves to come. I'd say over the next 15 years, you can expect a pretty good hockey stick climb. Let's put it this way. There's about 100 million paying subscription music consumers today, all right? That's globally, let's say. And you can't discount QQ Music and China Music or Savin in India or any of the other territories that we don't track. But that number probably goes from 100 million to 1 billion over the next 15 years. So the growth is significant. 1 billion paying customers of the network effect of consumption is crazy. So you got to look at that as a time period. What year it jumps, don't know. And then the second wave movement is that right now when you subscribe to Spotify, it's music only. Subscribe to Netflix, it's video and film only. If you subscribe to Amazon Prime, it's everything. So I call that my phone ringing. I call it it's bundled services. And in the bundled service revolution, which maybe Google Play and some other early versions are showing, you're going to have Apple, Facebook, I predict Netflix by Spotify, Amazon, and several other players migrating their individual subscriptions into bundled services. So you're going to pay $90 a year and you're going to get everything, or $90 a month, or $70 a month. And it'll be the new cable, except instead of 100 million cable households, well, 1 billion. And then that money fight is going to happen. So we'll see where that takes the music revenue specifically.
But is there a risk that the free services like YouTube grow faster than the paid ones, and that
no,
slows down the growth?
I think there's really two audiences. As I say, functionality doesn't go backwards in today's society. So, most people, when they want to decide to play an artist and they want to create a playlist, or they want to listen to a specific song or a specific set of songs, or listen passively, not watch, YouTube's not the best experience. If it was, you wouldn't have 100 million paying consumers today, right? That's a big number. That was the US cable household number, which was the biggest number we all used to write about. So I don't think that's what it's about. I think you have consumers that are going to pay $10 a month and say this is the best deal of all time, and you have consumers that don't care that much about music and say I'm going to listen to Pandora, I'm going to listen to YouTube, I'm going to listen to whatever free platforms. And so the overall audience, I think, is closer to 3.5 billion. So I'd say 1 billion paying, 2.5 billion passive, which is ad-supported revenue, which will be smaller than the other, but I still say that throws 10 to 15 billion revenue into the pot. So let's get real. Today, recorded music globally is how big? You write this for a living.
16 billion.
Okay, I say 16 billion will be ad-supported services within 15 years, by itself. So that's what you have to go with.
Okay.
By itself.
And what
That's
about,
with no sales.
wow.
Yeah. And I'll put money on it.
In the live space,
Yep.
how much further can that go? Are you seeing signs?
Goldman Sachs pegs it at 24 billion today. So the weird thing about the world, and we talked about it before, is that the touring business is $8 billion bigger than the recorded music business today. That was not perceived to be that way years ago. Goldman Sachs predicts it goes to 40 billion, which was, again, the peak of the record business. So that's a 50% growth from now. So if they're right, and obviously recorded music shoots past that, you got another 50% growth and you have a huge industry. So, and I believe all the figures, I actually think they're a little low.
Huh. Yeah. Are concert tickets underpriced right now?
It's too broad a question. Some concert tickets are overpriced.
Yeah.
And some concert tickets are underpriced. A lot like flights, right? If there's nobody who wants to go to a flight in Savannah, Georgia, tickets are overpriced. If everybody wants to go to New York, they're underpriced. So, and then you have, as you know, the whole scalping secondary market stuff is caused by two things. There's two fundamental problems. One is consumers and artists are not on the same page. Consumers want access to tickets at all time when they decide to go to a show, and they want choice of where they sit and how much they pay. Artists want you to sell out on the first day. They want to be done, okay? So their incentive is sell out, peace of mind, be hot, have positive perception, and price their tickets. Their pricing mechanism is what I call Facebook flame pricing. Where's the level at which somebody on Facebook doesn't say, fuck you, you're, sorry about my language, screw you, you are a capitalist, horrible artist. I would use different words normally. And that's right about where the artists want to go, right? They want to get paid the maximum amount without pissing off their core fans, which is not exactly Alan Kruger's supply and demand formula, all right? Anyway, so it's an interesting one. And so time, availability, and seat location factor into it. It's not how the industry's structured, all right? And the industry can't price the way it wants to because artists and people like me have some controls over pricing. So what happens is anytime you price something under market, there can be the creation of a secondary market, which there is in ticketing because there's more margin available. And it's a very Wild West still structure. The problem is everybody assumes that it's always high priced, and it's not. Sometimes tickets go for lower on the secondary market when there's availability. So it's more complex than just the, than sort of the headlines will tell you, and sort of the sloganeering. But I would say over the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be multiple, again, technology developments. You know, Live Nation has the ability to turn concert ticketing into airline ticketing. Quick scan, non-transferable, easy to do. There's reasons they haven't done it. They want a piece of the secondary market. Now StubHub gets powerful, Live Nation gets scared, now they develop the technology because they don't think they can make the money in the secondary market. These things have nothing to do with economics. So it's a complex question. Most concert tickets are not priced to market, is what I would say.
Can you talk more about that? Why Live Nation has this technology to do airline pricing, but they haven't used it? I mean,
because there's
what's the
multiple
difference to
hopes.
them if they take it from the
Could be
secondary
billing.
market or they get it on the primary
Well,
market?
if they could
by
monetize
pricing it
if
better?
they could monetize the secondary market and increase their profits as a result, and the industry would go along with them, it's a better business for them. Okay? Most people who run businesses would say, hey, I'd like to sell my home for the amount a consumer would pay for it. I don't want to develop a technology that sells the house for $200,000 less than is available because someone else is going to come in and sell it. That's unusual. So that's why their hope was that they could monetize that marketplace. And if there's $2 billion to $8 billion in the secondary market, hey, I want my piece of that.
Okay.
And even people like myself would like to, if we can't actually get the artist price to market, hey, why not? Why should someone else get that money, right?
So what do you do about it from your
We
agency's
push
perspective?
and yell and scream and cajole and lobby and try to make people feel foolish about their strategies.
Make who feel foolish?
Artist managers and others who are worried more about getting fired than optimizing the price. And that is a real worry in our business.
And how often are you successful with that, convincing
5%, maybe 10.
Do you think that
And you get little bits, all right? So I'll give you an example. So we work with a lot of artists. There's a particular artist I'll just reference who average ticket price is $125, $89, $59, $50. Those are the tiers, all right? When I go meet with them and say, hey, the front row, I'll show you all the data from the kayak of secondary markets called DTI. Here's how much your front row tickets actually sell for. It's $900 to $1,300. The second row sells from $500 to $800. The third through seventh rows sell for blank. All those are priced flat, the same at $125. Please let me take some of those tickets. I'll take 50% of them and price them at market. Okay, you can have 100 and put them at platinum. And platinum price at, let's say, $450. It's still under market. People buy it at $450, flip it for whatever. So that's an example. Then you might have that same artist who's having trouble selling the upper rows at $59.50, and you want to say, hey, I want to discount those to $29.50, but I'll make more money if you let me price the front rows effectively. And no, that's too cheap. I don't want to give away my tickets. So it's a complex thing, but what I'd say is we're still coming out of the era of rock and roll socialism and socialist pricing. All tickets $12. You know, you see these concert posters, Led Zeppelin, $3 and $4. Like, how did they ever make money? But so I think we have a long way to go, much like the fight we just are coming out of. These clips are fantastic. Of convincing people that $10 a month for access to the entire library of music was not a ripoff, right? I used to tell record company presidents, okay, let me get this straight. If you ran a restaurant, I could go in the restaurant for $10 a month and eat 24 hours a day, all the food I want, 30 days for $10. Or I can order off the menu a la carte for $12 for one plate. What's a better deal? And they'd say, the $12. I'd say, come on. What's a better consumer proposition? So, you know, we're coming out of that era where people really had head in the sand economics. And I think the concert industry is still in a bit of head in the sand economics. When you are growing from 8 billion to 24 billion, it's a different discussion than when you're falling from 40 billion to 14 billion like the record business did. There's no disruption. So it's a trick.
Okay. So you think artists might come up a little bit or be
I
more
think that everything is
flexible?
lemming theory, and that is, you know, I have an artist that says, I do it, but what's Bruce Springsteen and Bob Dylan doing? So their method of comparative pricing is what do other artists they respect allowing, and how's their fan reaction going?
Has there been an example of an act that's been willing to price all the tickets at market?
There's been a few.
Like any notable?
Let me come back to you on that.
Okay.
But you know, Barbara Streisand a while ago priced tickets at $1,000, and the whole industry went nuts. And her tickets weren't all at $1,000, but they were trying to say, hey, don't scalp. It's getting there. There's not true dynamic pricing yet. There's algorithms written, but it's, you know, we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
They tried auctions, they've tried this. You know, the other thing about consumers is they're tired easily. Nobody really wants to go through a circus. So a lot of the people go, no, let's do this and let's price this. And it makes a consumer go 2 or 3 times to a site or check the results, or it doesn't work. So, you know, within all this, you have to remember, we're growing up in an Amazon society. It's a point and click, get it done, boom. And if it's any more hassle than that, drop shopping cart.
Yeah.
So that's another factor.
Right. Reuters reported this week that Amazon is in talks to get into the ticketing space, and I'm wondering how you think that could affect the concert business and Ticketmaster's kind of monopoly power.
Well, first of all, Ticketmaster does not have a monopoly. It's perceived. It's not even close, all right? Want Tickets, Eventbrite, Ticketfly, Access. Europe, CTS is the lead, not Ticketmaster. Ticket Tech in Australia is the lead, okay? So I think there's just been a lot of press about Ticketmaster being the 800-pound gorilla in the marketplace. That being said, Amazon coming into any market should scare the shit out of everybody because they're Amazon and they're just their ethic, their technology, their fee structure, how much they can discount a market to get into it, blah, blah, blah. I personally think that they're going to try to get rights, but ticketing is an exclusive rights business, so they're going to either have to buy rights or they have to buy a company. Now, Amazon could buy Live Nation with their pocket change, right? So I think the era we're really going into is an era of continued M&A and consolidation. So this is the game for John Malone and Jeff Bezos to duke it out and go. As an example, Amazon tomorrow, other than antitrust, could buy AEG and Live Nation, right? So we don't know what's going to happen. But when, my premise, and you saw a couple of my speeches, were that, we're in the era of really big companies that never existed before. 2 billion customers, 800 million customers. These things didn't exist. And, if you're into digital technology, you start to realize, if you do understand the power of networking, that 800 million people on a network is very different than 100 million cable households all disconnected. And the power of that, the messaging, the marketing, and all those things. So I think these companies that have unheard of market caps and unheard of cash reserves, when they want to go into a market, they just got to figure out who they're buying and what they're doing. And Apple hasn't entered the game there. Facebook hasn't entered the game. They say they were going to enter. Spotify's going to enter the ticketing game. Amazon's entering the ticketing game. This is like at the beginning of full-scale craziness and disruption. So it's kind of fun.
What do you think that would mean?
And by the way, it should mean money for John Malone and Michael Rapino.
Yeah.
Because they could get attacked or bought.
Right. What do you think it means for the broader concert market, though, and ticket prices? I mean, Amazon has kind of a history of driving prices down.
Well, I'm not sure they have a history. That's consumer products with no scarcity.
Okay.
So this is not, these are scarce goods. So they're very different from a pricing mechanism. I think what it means is that, one, when you have an Amazon come in, you have customer confidence that goes through the roof, right? I think everybody in this room, the confidence level of placing an Amazon order is probably unheard of from anything in our lifetimes. Two, the interface will probably be pretty good and work on all your devices, and the technology will probably be really good. Three, I think their fees will be low. What happens to the actual price? I don't know. But let's see, because, competition does a lot of things. StubHub wants to get in the game in primary. SeatGeek is out there, and they just made a deal with MLS, the soccer, all soccer. I think it's not as simple as people think. And sports ticketing is completely divided and different. And they have marketplaces, so we'll see. It's going to be interesting. Somebody who writes a book on from here forward is going to be a good book.
And speaking of streaming services getting into ticketing, why has that taken so long? I mean, that seems like an obvious way for artists to sell tickets when they're streaming the music.
Of course.
And you should be able to,
So
see
if
what
everybody
concert.
takes out their phone, you go to Spotify, I'll show you something. Go ahead, take out your phones and open your Spotify real quick. Because I'll bet you don't even know this. This is something I find. First of all, the answer is, and go down to the bottom menu to browse, where you may not do that often. All right, now scroll down. You see something called concerts? Yes? Has anybody seen it before in this room? Raise your hand. Have you used it? Okay, it's the most effective concert guide that's out there right now, all right? Most people don't know it. So there's a couple things. One, what you're talking about is something we've talked about for years. I believe for 20 years that when streaming happened, that all the concert information sales would go in-app, okay, which is what you're kind of talking about. Spotify's developing it. Apple's still on the sidelines. It's early days, all right? And there's politics. And Jimmy Iovine, Apple Music's on the board of Ticketmaster, or Live Nation. So I think it is, there's conflict. Well, Live Nation doesn't necessarily want people not going to the Ticketmaster front door and buying inside Spotify, but that will fall. It's really a function of how much the Spotifys of the world had to fight the labels and then acquire customers and then make their services good. Ticketing's on the development path, but it just didn't get there yet.
Okay.
Because that's another set of deals and fights, and they're still trying to compete with each other and get customers and make their playlist meaningful and all those kind of things. So I think it's just a timing issue.
Got it.
But it is coming. The ticketing going in-app is going to be a biggie. And not just in-app the way you think, but it's contextual, right? So for me, who runs a big touring operation, as well as other things, I can't wait because everybody's streaming a video on YouTube, everybody's listening to a song on Pandora, everybody's going to be streaming a song on Spotify. I can't wait till they listen to a Kendrick Lamar song and he goes, hey, did you know Kendrick's at the Staples Center tonight and there's tickets available? Put your thumbprint here, boom, done. So that's just going to increase sales and make it more consumer friendly. So I'm psyched.
Okay.
I think the next 20 years is just finally out of the stupid time and into this crazy growth, technology development, more consumers, more people consuming music than the history of the world today. So that's kind of a good place to be.
Any questions from the audience?
Hi, I'm Feliz Vasilakis. Can you imagine a time? I'm Feliz Vasilakis. Can you imagine a time when artists, apparently they like to control the pricing of the tickets, they will keep it at a certain level. What if this remained the same, but artists and talent agents and promoters were given the opportunity to control the secondary market? What technology do you think it would take to allow this to happen, which will then discourage the scalpers?
Do you mean create their own secondary market platform? Or do you mean they're able to feed a certain amount of tickets into the secondary market? Which one?
Attach metadata to a ticket that will follow it through its path of reselling.
They have it.
And then set what's the maximum allowable price, and then how this profit is distributed, instead of now being
That's
the
what.
Wild West.
That's why I referenced what earlier Live Nation was talking about. That was what we are trying to do. And then we'll see how Michael Rapino and others react when they're worried about the threat, because ultimately there's multiple paths, right? If I decide to take 1,000 tickets a night and give them directly to StubHub, what happens? How does Ticketmaster react, right? And price them and put limits on it and get the customer data and all that kind of stuff. That's already happening. It's just not at scale, right? So I'm a believer of the following. It's as big a change to get the industry to think they shouldn't sell out and make tickets available for people who want to go as it was converting from CD sales to streaming. It's that big of a change of mentality, all right? And that's the problem. You're dealing with human emotion, you're dealing with people who are fear of failure, empty seats. This is like panic time, all right? It's the same emotion to convince everybody in this room it's safe to go out, leave your house, and leave all the doors and windows open. It's fine. How much work would I have to do with everybody in the room to convince them that that's okay, all right? A lot. And that's one issue. Number two is, as everybody knows, and I can't emphasize this enough, the business we're all in is some level of a hit-based business. And when people achieve success, the biggest fear is rolling backwards, okay? The biggest fear is giving up that success, no matter what you say. This is an insecure-driven business. I want to maintain my position and grow, right? By the way, CEOs with stock price have the same issue. They don't want their stock to go back down, okay? So to convince somebody when they're getting flamed in social media that they're overcharging, people are never going to go, it's one comment has the power in somebody's mind of millions of people, all right? And that's another thing that is about human nature to combat, all right? So now I'm saying to them, okay, every artist, I want you to leave home, leave all your doors and windows open, and I'm going to put 2 complete strangers in your house to watch it while you're gone. And I got to convince them of that. That's tough, and that's an equivalent thing. So we'll see, but I think that's what we're dealing with in the industry. And when I go talk to people, I give them a travel analogy. I said, okay, Alan, you got to get back to New York to Princeton. Go online, get a ticket. If they were all sold out, you'd be pissed. Because right now we're not a society that can't get to New York, Okay, where there's a will, there's a way. There's a certain amount of flights, there's a certain amount of capacity. And even if you have to pay more because it's a late ticket, right? Oh, I don't want to fly first class. Oh my God, they're charging me $1,000 for a coach ticket. It's available. Okay, there's just it's late minutes, holiday seasons, hotel rooms. That's all in a seasonal, dynamically priced, but there is availability. Concert industry, you're screwed. You want to go to Tom Petty at the Hollywood Bowl in September, you guys are screwed. You got to buy secondary market tickets. They didn't care that you wanted to go in the last minute and you got a babysitter and you and your wife decided to go out. So, it's a pretty large scale change to get to that next step of economics, to get that extra money in the ecosystem. That's my answer.
I think what you described, Marc, is really the model of pricing that every economy and I have. It's not simply supply and demand. There's this
No, I'm kidding. Yeah.
So we were actually really happy to hear the Facebook screw you level. And it's also very similar to the surge pricing with Uber, which at first was very difficult. Uber almost backed away from it. But it also says that over time, these social markets moved from being like a block party to being like a commodity market. And I'm curious, when you look down the road and you said that touring revenue you think is going to grow considerably, how much of that do you think is going to be because of higher prices? How much because of
20% higher prices, 80% a combination of demand and supply. And the other big factor is globalization, okay? Because when you talk about revenue, whether it's recorded music revenue, or whether it's touring revenue, or merch any revenue, okay? When all of a sudden China starts paying music revenue, and it might start at $1 a month, and it goes to $2 a month, and you have 800 million paying customers, or 1 billion, you're talking about unprecedented numbers. So I think you have globalization, which is activating all over the world because all the platforms we're talking about are global, and every kid, every music fan all over the world now has unfettered access the same way everybody here does. That's a major, major, major difference from when Hannah was writing about the industry in the 90s, right, or 2000. So that's a biggie. Price optimization, 20%. I think globalization is probably 40%. And I think that somebody used to go out and they do 30 dates and say, I did my tour. And now the streaming demand and consumption says you can play 130 dates. So those extra 100 shows that they play, maybe not because of globalization, but just even in the markets that were there before and the money's gone up because demand's gone up, that's the rest of it. So that's my gut breakdown of the growth of revenue. And that's off my head, that's not scientific, to be clear.
One second question, then I'll hand over the mic to someone else. Yesterday, Joel Wallfogel gave a very interesting presentation about how what we call home bias has been declining since streaming started, meaning that Brits listen to less British music, Americans listen to less American music. We become, as you said,
homogenized, or less aware of where things are from.
Where the origins are from.
Yeah, I would totally agree.
And is that going to change your business?
I call that globalization. It already has. Let me explain. It's funny. We talk about this. If 20 years ago you were an artist in Australia or Canada, weirdly, especially pre-Justin Trudeau, and we knew that the artist came from Canada, most of the U.S. market in radio was dismissive. Oh, they're going to suck. They're going to be like Nickelback or Tragically Hip, okay? And that's actually true. That happened. That bias existed. Australia, same thing. If it was from the UK, it had a positive index. Oh, I got to listen to this, right? Now, and I think this went back to the early 90s when that first cartoon came out with a dog sitting behind the computer and said on the internet, no one knows you're a dog, right? Which is true. When files, streams, and other content comes out now, it doesn't have a meta tag unless you search for it. It also, Steve Jobs pulled one on the labels. Somebody pull out their Spotify or Apple Music and tell me what label something's on anymore. Now, I'm a label freak. I grew up 4AD and Beggar's Banquet and Rough Trade, and this is a big deal to me. ECM, if you're a jazz person, or whatever, you can't find it anymore. So the tag of label / origin and the tag of where something from is gone. So first consumption, there's no bias, and that is a big deal. And that has impact, to your point. Now, by the way, if you're a hip-hop artist and you're from England, there's some bias, but that's a different issue.
Hi, Marc, over here. My question to you is, what is your relationship with the record labels, and how did their 360 deals affect your daily business?
Okay, we're another big piece of the ecosystem that sits alongside the record labels, and we obviously have to have good relations with them. They refer people to us, we refer people to them. And then when agencies and others work with artists that are currently signed to a label, you try to integrate inside the marketing process and sync things up from a timing standpoint, a territorial standpoint. That's the way it should work. It works maybe 5% of the time, and people just do their own business and talk via email. It's not as organized as it should be. So that's answer number one to you. But referral business, I have a separate relationship because I was trying to push them into the digital revolution, but that's neither here nor there. I think they really operate primarily as separate businesses, just to give you your answer. The 360 revolution occurred at sort of the early period of the slide of recorded music revenue, when the labels really were fighting the transition to digital and trying to keep the model of physical, and then ultimately iTunes, which is just the digital replacement for the physical. And they weren't in the right model, so revenue just kept falling, so you have a smaller pie and you have to grab more of that pie to survive, okay? And so they wrote up and signed probably 10 years worth of new artists that didn't have leverage, and let me explain that in a minute, to deals where they got pieces of multiple revenue streams. What happened that's true, though, is the labels didn't put in place specialists to collect that money or track that money or push managers to have business meetings to optimize that money. So they had the agreement and they got some money out of it, and it helped. At the same time, because of open platforms, artists that were not baby artists were taking deals the other way and saying, okay, I'm not going to sign to you anymore, but you can put out my music under a distribution deal. And I'm going to own everything, and I'm going to make a larger chunk of the money. So at the same time, you had worse deals happening and better. At the same time. And now there's more choices of deals and types and distributors than ever before. So the question is how much risk an artist wants to take. Do I want to give up for that extra financing? I want to sign to a label and give up X rights. Now what's happened since the business is getting healthier is business affairs at the labels are backing away a little bit and being more artist friendly because they don't have to get that extra revenue, and they also know we weren't that good at collecting it anyway, all right? And so they're doing other things. So they start a whole merch company, and they're actually doing it well this time. So Universal, there's a gentleman in the room from Universal. They bought Bravado, and Bravado's a big deal for Universal. They refer an artist. They don't have to collect anymore. They make money off the company. Okay, they might collect a little, but they make money off Bravado. And so labels have diversified some of their investments and portfolios to a whole bunch of things. Universal took a piece of, as I'm just using Universal because somebody's here from there. They took a piece of Superfly. Now they're sort of in the festival business, and they're growing their portfolio almost more like a investor. So it's an evolution is the answer. The 360 wave is not the draconian, every artist is locked up forever and blah, blah, blah. There was just a lot of hype about it. Like there was a lot of hype about consumers not paying $10 a month. There was a lot of hype about artists being pissed off they're not getting their fair share. They're getting 70% of the gross that goes to live. So there was a lot of noise in the media about all this stuff. But the truth is, artists have more options than ever. Labels are starting to make a lot of money again and about to get really, really, really wealthy again, but more wealthy than ever. And the deals reflect that environment is the best way I can say it to you.
Hey Marc, you talked for a minute about just the growth of the touring industry. Can you talk for a little bit about the change that we've seen in the past 10, 15 years to festivals and bundling, rebundling versus smaller, just one-off acts?
You don't mean bundling of music, you mean packages of artists playing together. Is that what you meant by bundling?
Yeah, in some sense, you're kind of bundling all of these different artists together. You get a bunch of people to come see Kanye West, but they're also going to have the effect of seeing a bunch, sort of like you get a bunch of people who pay for ABC and ESPN, but you have a bunch of people also that will tune in to see it at time as well, when they bought that originally.
Yeah.
But in any event, just where do you see the industry going as far as touring, whether we're going to see
Straight line growth. Here's the truth. Festivals went through, music industry and others go through waves, okay? And they're usually product-driven waves. A lot of things about the entertainment industries are very inefficient and that's what everybody in the room has to understand. And they start from the most inefficient place, and then through disruption and other things, they end up hopefully in an efficient place. So let me tell you a festival story. Festivals were actually pioneered in this country in the 60s, Altamont, Monterey Pop, Woodstock, etc. The people that started those things, and they could be huge, 500,000 people, Woodstock, whatever, all right, didn't say, ooh, I had success, I built a brand, let's do it again the next year. That went to the English, who started Glastonbury, and then they said, hey, this worked out pretty well, I'm gonna do it again next year. And they made a ton of money the second year, okay? The Americans at that point were too stupid to repeat. This is not a joke. Us Festival, Cal Jam, I don't care, you name it. Up until the 90s, the entire continent, which was supposed to be the business economy, spent all that money for a one-off, got all those people, and then never repeated. Meanwhile, Reading Festival was developing in Glastonbury, whatever. So what happened was, and I was part of it with Lollapalooza, I'd go to Europe and go, man, we are stupid. How did we not do this? And Horde started. I started Lollapalooza with Perry and another colleague. And the era of the repetitive brand building festivals began, started in a touring market, then Paul Tillett started Coachella, rest is history, okay? So the boom isn't about talent or even a collection of artists. It was a lifestyle because people don't go to a festival to see one band. That's very inefficient. It's a lot of hassle, high price, a lot of time spent. You're not getting a fixed seat, you're in a field somewhere, right? Maybe you gotta stay for whatever. To go see Kanye, People are going there to hang with their friends, see music, take a lot of drugs, drink, have fun, and have a social experience, okay? It's ranked, if you look at consumer surveys, it's ranked as one of the top 3 customer experiences in the world is hanging out at a festival. Okay, now I'm just saying, for a certain demographic, if you go poll a bunch of 50-year-old stockbrokers, that's not exactly, that Fire Festival was for them. Didn't work out too well. But I'm in that business. You don't see that much joy in the world as much as kids at a festival. It's insane, all right? But they're not going there for one act. I understand what you're saying about bundling. I dismiss the notion of bundling because there's all kinds of, it's a collection of artists, but people are enjoying spending a weekend at an experience or more than a weekend, right? What I'd say is that the customer experience plus the programming got good, and that took a lot of time. Not all of them are good. But the ones that are good, if you talk to people that come back from, I just had Lollapalooza this last week in Chicago, or Coachella's, or any of the good ones, and there's quite a few of them, it's an experience for people, and it rates high enough that, people go year after year after year. I mean, if you think about Jazz Fest in New Orleans or Newport, I know people are going to Jazz Fest 30 years, and that is, they live for that weekend to go to New Orleans. And it ain't about just the music. Last I checked, it's drinking, it's the food, it's the this, it's the vibe, right? It's going to New Orleans. And I think it's the same in most cases. So I think what we have is just a maturation of an industry, and it's gotten big because people love doing that. And again, globalization. When I took Lollapalooza to South America, there was a couple festivals, and that's it, and they were all driven by some telco or whatever, into a single stage experience. You go to South America, you build a 5-stage, 6-stage festival, and it's really good, and people are freaking out, and you have 110,000 people a day because people love to do that, and kids want to socialize. It's the biggest school outing you can have. So, yeah, all right.
Great, thank you so
We
much.
done?
That was great.
My pleasure.
Yes, or you can use this if you'd like. Oh, okay. It's up to you.
All right. Okay. Hi, guys. I'm Gabby Lopes. I'm the head of Global Insight for Universal Music. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Jeannie, for the invitation to come here and talk to you guys. I'm based in London, passing by LA, enjoying the sunshine for a change. And I'm going to go through a few slides before Hannah then talks to me, and we have a bit of a Q&A, and you guys are more than welcome to ask your questions. But I wanted to quickly talk about the importance of artist brands in this new entertainment economy, and looking at how growth in streaming, whether that's actually changing the role of artist development. So, and you might have seen a lot of trend data yesterday from Russ and the other guys, but streaming is set to become the biggest source of recorded music revenue globally. So last year, streaming was accounting for 29% of our revenues, and physical 34%, and this is at global level. I think 2017 is going to be the year that we're going to see streaming accounting for the majority, for the biggest part of the pie at a global level. In the US, that's already the case, but globally, that's not yet the case. We're going to see that happening with the growth in streaming that we have seen. And I think it's interesting when we look at what's actually driving that economy, looking at new releases and catalog. And this is from Nielsen in the US. It's the volume of streams and whether they're coming from new releases or catalog. And even though there has been a growth in new releases, in the share of new releases from 23% to 26%, artists with established careers are the ones that are driving the bulk of engagement. So artists that have had more than one album, that have essentially have their careers nurtured, are the ones that are driving the economy at this stage. And I don't think this is a changing behavior. Think of your CD collection, or go back 10 years. When you wanted to listen to your favorite artist, you would pick the CD from the shelf and you would put it on. What happened was that we were monetized once with the sale of the CD, and the listening that happened for a long period of time afterwards wasn't really tracked or didn't account in the sales. With streaming, we're seeing that engagement over time. So every time that I go back to my favorite, I actually see that in the stats. So we are seeing pretty much similar behavior. It hasn't really changed, but the business model actually gives us visibility to how big that engagement actually is. So the other thing is, because of the volume of content available, and especially if you talk to teenagers and young consumers, just the volume of content that is available to them, we're seeing that they're digesting music in more, in snacks. They're snacking a little bit more. And that's actually, what we're seeing is that that's prolonging the life cycle of a project or an album, for example, and inherently driving catalog as well. So I'll give you an example. These are two artists of ours, and you're looking at the volume of streams over time for specific singles of these artists. And for one of them, for example, you had 3 singles from the same album, but they were marketed and worked on for over 2 years. So immediately that release is a catalog release, and yet it's still very much sort of a new release. It's actually a developing artist that we have seen. So the always-on marketing era is definitely coming along. We're seeing that artists are releasing content at specific times, and we're trying to maximize the times at which they are actually prevalent in consumers' minds, keeping them fresh, keeping them top of mind, but also sort of extending the life cycle of a release. And by looking at these stats, you might ask, well, isn't this sort of supporting the argument that it's just about singles today? You know, things come and go, and essentially we're looking at a singles market with playlists and streaming. And we did a lot of analysis on this. It's a very topical question. Is the album actually dead for young consumers? And again, this is sort of a distilled version of a very big study that we have been looking at internally. And this is looking at streams over time for 3 specific artists that I think exemplify the point that I'm trying to make, which you're seeing in the blue line. So in this first chart here, the blue line is the the number of streams for the singles in that album. And in the yellow line is the sum of all of the other, the streams of all of the other tracks. And in this specific album, there were 20 tracks. So we're talking about 3 singles and 17 tracks. What we can see is that the singles are really driving the consumption for that artist and for that album. But if you look at the other 2 examples, you can see the 2 lines are very close. So there is singles consumption, but there is also consumption of the rest of the album. So even for young consumers in their streaming environment, we see for some artists, the album is still very much alive. And we did see a correlation of album consumption and strong artist brands and strong careers as well. So when you look at the top-selling artists in the US in the past 6 months, we can see that these artists, most of them actually have careers spanning, nearly 10 years or over. These are artists that have been nurtured and their careers have been really expanded and developed over time. A lot of them actually have more than 1 album. Kendrick is a great example because he is sort of at the very, very top of the pyramid when it comes to album consumption. He's been listened to as a body of work pretty much in every one of his releases. Drake is another great example. You think of Views, it was a massive hit, that song, a global hit. And yet, when you look at the consumption of the album, it was very much being listened to as a body of work. So again, the notion that the album is dead in the streaming world, I don't think that still applies. For some artists, yes, but not all. And I think the key thing here is, the extent and how long these artists have been around. So artists that are relevant today and that are driving engagement are those that have these established careers. 2 other examples from other parts of the world. Helene Fischer, you might not have heard of her, but she's absolutely huge in Germany. And she has 8 albums and she has been around for 12 years. And this album that she released earlier this year is the biggest album ever of her career. So it's an artist that has been nurtured again for a long period of time, and we are seeing sort of her best results right now in the streaming world. Not to mention Despacito. I think you have to be under a rock not to have heard that song. Really, really big globally. And I think, again, when you look at Luis Fonsi and Daddy Yankee, most of us are hearing about these names for the first time now. But these guys have been around for a long time. They have nearly, 20 albums between them. They have been nurtured and they have been working in the Latin region for a long time. Daddy Yankee is the godfather of reggaeton, which is now sort of a genre that is globally accepted and, very fashionable, very trendy. So I think the combination of sustained artist investment coupled with a global infrastructure of a company can give sort of the results that we see in Despacito, which is, has broken every record for a song. Established careers are also moving social engagement. So if you look at the top 5 most followed Instagram pages, they're all female, with the exception of Mr. Ronaldo. I think Neymar is actually going to come and get him very, very soon. So I don't think he's going to be in there for too long. But all of these artists, again, they have been around for nearly 10 years. So they have been artists that have had a career, and they have an established career, and they are moving vast amounts of engagement in social networks. And this engagement is really driving economies. So when we look at the level of interaction that we see on social media, for example, with our artists, is absolutely immense. We're talking billions in each one of these platforms per day. All of this is generating data capture. All of this is aiding advertising revenues. I won't extend too much, but the value gap comes up. When we are generating so much of that engagement, where is the exchange and where is the value exchange as well? Devices. Amazon Echo is a hit. It has grown so much quicker than some people expected. We're doing a lot of work looking at what impact voice is going to have on music consumption, and we think that it's going to be quite big. And these are devices that, when we look, our anecdotal research indicates that it's between 60 to 90% of all of the usage is music. So it's really sort of the main function for one of these devices. Sonos and Beats headphones, big economies right there, being driven by music as well. Not to mention, of course, the services themselves. And it's not just that economy or those economies, but also the entertainment economy. So increasingly, we are seeing artists sort of permeating into audiovisual, for example, film. So Amy is a great example of a music-based film that has had sort of critical acclaim and so on. We're seeing Straight Out of Compton, Queen and VR experiences, TV series. All of this is essentially music coming into other entertainment platforms, into different verticals. Art is another one. So exhibitionism from the Rolling Stones, a fantastic exhibition. I mean, that's essentially an art experience that is music-based. Fashion is another one, and we were talking about bravado, merchandise. Merchandise is essentially moving into the fashion space. So merchandise is not a T-shirt anymore, it's a fashion statement, and essentially sort of ownership, claiming that ownership space that consumers still display. Theater is another one. Hamilton is a great example of this, so it's music-based entertainment. Mannequin Challenge, the song was made huge, and it was, basically a global phenomenon. Live is actually a space that is growing a lot, so these festival brands, and also gaming, music getting into gaming. So we're seeing that music is fueling not only sort of the tech space, but also the entertainment space, and that's becoming a lot more intertwined. And I'll put here a quote of our leader, Sir Lucian, on the improvement of the industry, but also sort of what the underlying focus and the reason why music companies exist, which is really to foster the campaigns of artists and make sure that consumers develop that bond with the artists, and the artists are able to communicate their creative vision to their fans. It's all about nurturing talent and building those connections. So the music itself is definitely not enough. You have to have a story, you have to have a narrative, and you have to have slides too. To build that fan community and essentially develop those connections. And we have done a lot of research around what makes a superstar. What are the factors that really sort of we see in common amongst those developed artists? And there are three things that come over and over. One is caring about fans, so building that strong connection with the fan base. It's really, really important. Generation Z and millennials, they want to be part of the journey. They want to be close to the artists. They want to feel, part of that journey, and they want to be relatable. Authenticity is also a big thing, and artists need to be authentic. They have to find their own lane, and they have to have their own voice. And relevance is the third one, being a major influence in pop culture. So these are sort of what we see as some key elements in building that strong connection with the fans. And there is no better story than Justin Bieber. I mean, that's the perfect narrative. I mean, he has managed to really sort of connect with his fans through the narrative over time, of Superboy to the Bad Boy, Rebirth and Sorry, and making sure that he continues that connection. And you go to one of Justin's shows and you see sort of young fans that are not that young anymore, but you see that they came from the very beginning of his career and they're still with him now. So this investment in marketing and A&R remains really the core of the industry. So it's an industry that generally, I don't know what's going on with the slides here, apologies. It's an industry that invests about 25% to 27% of revenues into A&R and marketing. And it's really sort of safeguarding the renewal of the cycle of new artists coming in, which really fuels this broad economy, not only sort of the technology part, but the entertainment part as well. And, Sam Smiths and Halsey, these are the names that are going to be sort of the catalog of tomorrow. These are the names that are going to be the interaction going forward for many years to come. And it's our job and our responsibility to service them in the best way possible. So artists with established careers that have been nurtured over time are ruling this new economy. And this new economy is growing, and it is already very big. Music is increasingly prevalent across these multiple cultural verticals, film, games, you name it. We are getting into all of that space, which is maintaining the relevancy of our artists, reaching our fans through different touch points, making sure that they are always on, but also feeding this wider economy. And it's this continuing investment that really sort of keeps us. And it's one fundamental thing that has not changed in a music company, is this commitment to developing artists and funding and discovering new talent and bringing it to market and making our bets, but making sure that fans have an opportunity to connect with these artists in new ways. So that's my intro. Thank you. Shall we take a seat?
You want to sit, or would you rather just stand?
Yeah,
Whatever you
that's good. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's sit.
I'm curious to know, if you're seeing that established artists are the ones that are really driving engagement in the streaming world. On the flip side, does that make it harder to break new artists? I mean, even though you're investing in them, how do you, as a label, break new artists through that system?
I think breaking artists is still sort of the most important thing and where we spend a lot of our time, because nurturing careers is obviously important, but you need to safeguard and bring the new generation in. So we need to develop the catalog of tomorrow as well. So I think the space is definitely more, it's difficult. Young consumers have limited time. I think we're seeing that they're spending more time on entertainment than ever. Mm-hmm. Music is being listened by more music and actually is claiming more time. But there is a lot of things out there, and actually being top of mind is very hard. So I think it takes a different approach, and I think this always-on marketing is definitely something that we're seeing more of. Mm-hmm. This need to, through different ways, being top of mind on, in consumers' visibility is very, very important, and it's a different way to market. I think in the past it was very much, let's look at a release and let's do the marketing push at that point in time. Now it's how can we extend that and sort of be always in conversation mm-hmm. with the consumer.
And does always-on marketing cost more, or is it just spreading out the marketing investment over time?
It's a job of spreading it and being creative on how you spread it. So being very targeted about knowing the audiences for our artists, leveraging different touch points that perhaps we didn't have before, for example, the different verticals. So whether it's, utilizing audiovisual, whether it's, going into the games lane for the gaming community, or utilizing different verticals that perhaps we didn't have before.
Mm-hmm. And with Helen Fisher, who you spoke about, who I've heard her name recently, but she's not a known quantity in the U.S.
Right.
Among mainstream fans. But given the success of Despacito around the world, how far do you see a Helen Fisher going in the streaming world? Like, do you think that German language music could potentially?
I think there are different artists that will work globally. I think Helen has always been sort of a very, very strong act in Germany. I think there might be some countries where she can reach within Europe. I don't think there has been the focus for the marketing there to sort of globalize Helen. Mm-hmm. But if you will look at Despacito, for example, you know, the Spanish community is, and there are, you know, Spanish language is, you know, very, very big and spread around the world. I think it's a great example of content that can travel. We saw not many years ago sort of the South Korean that made it, and there was Michel Teló, a Brazilian that some time ago also made sort of global waves. So Despacito, I think it's a great example not only of the strength of Spanish language music and reggaeton, sort of a Caribbean sound that has been sort of pretty much exported, but also what it takes from a global structure to propel a song into pretty much global, into a global audience, which I think it's definitely something new that we're seeing in the industry, and it's opening a lot of doors for different repertoire from different parts of the world to actually reach consumers in a lot of different places.
And with all the data that you're getting from streaming services, which I understand is getting just more and more detailed, do you use that data at all in the creative process? Like, because you can see when people are skipping songs and who's skipping the songs, and what is that something that you know, factor into A&R decisions when you're making records and trying to figure out where to bring in the hook or whatever?
Yeah, I think data is definitely making a lot more, it's playing a lot more into decision making. I think in the A&R process there are a lot of variables. I think data is one of them. I think there is still very much sort of understanding the artist, very much sort of the talent approach, which I don't think has gone away, and I don't think it will ever go away. No matter how much data we have, it's also a combination of the data and that human element, understanding the artist, seeing the vision and trying to amplify that vision, which is still very much sort of at the core of the A&R function. I don't think data will replace that, but I think data combined with that can make a very powerful combination.
Okay. And a few years ago, I remember Universal launched a kind of internal data system called Artist Portal, I think.
Yeah.
And it sort of for the first time incorporated so many different data sets that you can make marketing decisions on. But at the time, there were still more data sets being ingested, and I was wondering if there are any data sets outstanding that you're still hoping to incorporate that could help you even improve further the
We always want more data sets.
Is there anything in
There is
particular that you're looking to bring in that would change the way that you can
I think to really
market?
understand consumers, there are a lot of different types of data. So we say yes to any and every data. And I think there is still a lot of things that we need to sort of have a very good look into and sort of mine. And we already have a lot, but I also believe in different types of data. So yes, it's understanding, you know, what are people listening to at that time, but also trying to marry that with why are people behaving the way that they're behaving, which might sort of actually come from consumer level data or actually talking to consumers. So I think it's a combination of different data sources and different data types that can give us the 360 view of the consumer. But I think the more the merrier. We're always looking for more.
Is any examples of anything you're focused on in particular right now? Any insights over the past year that have been the most surprising from the data that's coming in?
There is a lot, Hannah, and I could bore you for 3 hours on this. Maybe I'll bore you for another 20 over lunch. But
Perfect.
There is, yes, I mean, there is uncoverings that, you know, come on a daily basis, and it's also about having the right approach to the data and not sort of taking a step back as well and looking at the big picture. It's a combination of things.
Any questions from the audience?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks for the talk. Very interesting. We heard yesterday, and I guess all of us know, that music's a very risky business. Very few of the artists that get invested in succeed, and so that's one of the reasons it's been so investment intensive. And we hear the number of $4.5 billion invested every year and so forth, and it all seems true. My question is about whether new technology has substantially changed that. I mean, so the example of Justin Bieber that you put up, I mean, Justin Bieber is said to have been discovered on YouTube, and so in some sense he was a low-risk investment by the time he was being invested in, and there are other examples as well. It's like, my question really is, how much of an impact have these new technologies had on making it less expensive to invest and less risky to invest in artists?
I think there's definitely an element of reducing risk, but if I was standing here and said that I have the crystal ball to know what actually is going to be a success, I would definitely be lying, and I would definitely not be sitting here if I had that. So I don't think that exists, and again, I think we can't forget that music is a creative product, and it's all about how people emotionally connect with the product. And I think it's very hard to therefore predict. So this combination of data and sort of the knowledge and the talent management and all of that, I think is fairly unique about music. Perhaps when you look at film or TV, it might not exactly be like that, because I don't know, there is something very unique about music, and I think, you know, the talent and developing the talent and the emotional connection is very important. Has data helped the process, and has that made it sort of less risky? Absolutely, but it hasn't eliminated the risk altogether, and I don't think it will.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you. Based on your answer to this question, do you think Universal has any plans to continue investing, to enhance investment in new talent, in search of this undiscoverable revenue through data analysis?
Absolutely, absolutely. So as the industry grow, and I think the stats that I showed, the 25% of industry revenues, that has been relatively constant for the past 5 years at least, that I remember IFPI putting together that number. As the industry begins to, you know, grow again, and that's the trajectory that we're seeing, that we're expecting, that number is just going to get bigger. So obviously the pool for investment in absolute terms gets bigger. I think data is obviously playing an ever more important part of, you know, talent discovery and marketing, distribution and so on. So targeting audiences and all of that, I think that's a great contribution of data today. We understand a lot more about what is the audience of an artist, how do we actually reach them, how can we essentially make our marketing spend more effective, diminish the amount of waste. These are all things that technology improves a great deal. I think it's the A&R process in itself, which is sort of where it's a mix. It's that mix of data intelligence and, you know, the elusive. And I think it should continue to be that way.
Okay, thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
While Adam Fella's coming up, I thought I'd make an announcement that we're running a bit behind, if you looked at the schedule. And we're going to play what I call by Bob Solo rules. Many of you may know Bob Solo is a great economist. He's 92 years old. And when I went to a conference with him recently, he said, we're not going to take any break. If you need to get up and go to the bathroom, get up and go to the bathroom. We're going to continue. There's coffee in the back. So if you want to walk out and get a cup of coffee at some point, you're welcome to. After this session, we have two parallel presentations. We're going to use two rooms. The Optimist room is upstairs. There will be people directing you up there. We'll take a very short break after Hannah interviews Adam, and people can choose which sessions to go to. We have two rooms. We'll have them recorded so that you can watch if you missed one of the sessions. And I'm really delighted that Adam Fell agreed to fill in for us. If you don't know him, he's president of Quincy Jones Production and will soon be listed in the Billboard Most 100 Powerful People in the Music Business. So Hannah and Adam, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Alan.
So can you talk about what you do as the president of Quincy Jones's production company? What's your
Sure.
daily?
So obviously, when you work for a guy like Quincy Jones, who's kind of done it all, right? He produced the best-selling album of all time, the best-selling song of all time, We Are the World, produced a movie that was nominated for 11 Academy Awards, The Color Purple, started by Magazine, discovered Will Smith with The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. When you come to work for a guy like that, and I came to work for him when I was about 23 years old, you're very self-conscious that, you know, there's kind of nothing you can do that'll ever make it on his resume. And so I was a young kid that came out of college and came to work for him at his production company, and he had a bunch of projects going on. But the way that we kind of connected was I pitched him this idea of releasing a CD for free and having the liner notes be a Sky Mall catalog where you got lead referral fees for product that you sold. And he told me, "You're an idiot, you know, that's a terrible idea, but we should work together." And I think that's one of the things that's so incredible about Quincy is even at 84 years old, he changes his mind really easily. And so over the last 14, 15 years now, we've built a company that is very diversified and kind of started with the premise that, you know, 1999 was the rise of Napster, and, you know, the early 2000s were everything from Morpheus to LimeWire, and supposedly BitTorrent was moving 2.5 billion downloads every 72 hours, right? So as great as iTunes was, it was irrelevant because consumption was 99% illegal. And given those statistics, we had to figure out how to create a company that actually saw the future, that did things that worked in a very struggling economy. So we started a management company because that was my version of a 360 label, right?
What year was that?
And that was about 2006. We wanted really badly to be close to artists and still be involved in the music creation process and still be the guys backstage that were cheering as an artist had big moments and get the chills and stuff like that. We also started focusing on endorsements and licensing. So that, of course, was a business that was just burgeoning, and of course, the Beats thing is the ultimate example of that. Then we started kind of looking at our production company and figuring out what are the things, you know, that are still going to exist in a future economy. And of course, the first answer to that is what Marc Geiger was talking about, extremely eloquently, I might add, in Live. And then also we started kind of working on things like film and TV projects that would diversify the company's revenue streams. Then we started looking at investments. Quincy was one of the, most people don't know this, but I lose my mic. Hello, hello? Still working, sorry. Most people don't know this, but Quincy was one of the first investors in Spotify in his 80s, right? And this is a guy who's made his living as this producer of the best-selling album of all time. So you'd think that he'd be a kind of, you know, beacon of the old music industry, and yet he was able to recognize, you know, hey, things are changing, and he was able to get in on Spotify very early.
How does he stay so close to youth culture at the age of 84? Does he have any tactics for that?
The back row of the room on this side over here is the answer to that. He hires young people who have their ear to the ground and who are more in touch, you know, than I am. They actually know what's going on, and he surrounds himself with people that disagree with him, which I think is a really unique quality. He hates yes men. He always kind of says to new employees, the last thing I want is a yes man. And I think that is kind of, and you know, maybe why he hired me when I presented him something that he totally disagreed with.
And given all the diversified businesses you have, is there a central one, or how do you make most of your money?
There are two
different
questions there. How do we make most of our money, our investments, and our licensing deals?
Okay.
Where do we spend most of our time? On our management company. And I think it is essentially those licensing deals, joint ventures, and investments that really finance the ability for us to pursue our passion, which is still identifying someone who's talented enough that deserves it, and spending time on that person.
And can you talk about some of the artists that you manage? And
Sure. I'll give three examples, I think, that represent three very different types of artists. And I've been watching, the morning sessions, and I feel like the answer to most questions is it depends on the artist, right? Every artist is different. It's like starting a new company. And the first artist I'll talk about is Jacob Collier. So Jacob is a viral YouTube multi-instrumentalist who essentially, in his bedroom, started making YouTube videos where he played all the instruments, sang up to 14-part harmonies. The kid has a 4.5 octave range. And he was writing songs too from an early age, but most of the early videos were covers that he was putting up on YouTube. And they were so unique that they started to go viral. One of them was a Stevie Wonder cover called Don't You Worry About a Thing, and that got sent to me and Quincy by like 10 different people, and everyone's saying, you've got to see this, you've never seen anything like it. So we checked it out, and Quincy, I was kind of like of the mindset, and Alan and I talked about this a couple days ago, you never want to be too busy for something great that comes along. And I was kind of, mistakenly of the mindset, I'm too busy for this. Quincy, on the other hand, never has that mindset, and he said, I don't care, this kid is incredible, you got to work with him. And of course, we all thought he was incredible, but we got to know him, and pretty soon after maybe 3 or 4 Skype calls, it was obvious this kid was, I'll go so far as to say once in a generation. He really is playing, a dozen instruments at the highest level. He really is arranging vocal harmonies to the level of someone like Take 6 by himself. And he's not making pop music. You look at all of these examples of these huge, massive artists that are, topping the Billboard charts. He's not one of those, but he's going to do about 250 dates on his first tour. He did 2 Samsung commercials this year. He won 2 Grammys on an album he made in his bedroom. And I think he's the epitome of an artist who has done it himself and utilized these new tools that technology has afforded him to create a career. So that's Jacob. Another example would be Alfredo Rodriguez. Alfredo is an instrumental artist, right? I don't think anyone else is talking about instrumental music up here. Alfredo I met because Quincy was at the 2006 Montreux Jazz Festival, saw this kid play in the piano competition and said, that's the best pianist I've ever heard, I want to work with him. He came back and gave me a business card with the kid's email address on it. I emailed it, and it turns out he's in Cuba, and of course at that time there's an embargo, so it's illegal for us to work together. So anyways, a year and a half after that, I meet him in Mexico because he gets permission from the Cuban government to travel to Mexico. And in Mexico, he basically says, I'm going to defect from Cuba and I want to come to the United States, but I have no money. And what should I do? And in kind of one of those crazy leap of faith moments, I said, you'll come live with me. And so Alfredo defected from Cuba, came and lived on my couch, had nothing. And 5 years later, he was nominated for his first Grammy. And that was a really crazy full circle moment for me, of course. The third example is an artist named Grace. Quincy had been trying to get one of our young artists to do a cover of the song You Don't Own Me, which he originally did with Leslie Gore in 1964. And funny enough, 2 of the artists we used to work with both said, no, that's not for me, or just never got around to it, whatever the reason was, they didn't do it. Grace finally did it, and we worked with her and her label RCA and her manager, F.A. Benny. And that song ended up going to #1 in her home country of Australia. Then it went to #1 at UK radio, and then all of a sudden RCA started paying attention to it in America. And it's done, more than 250 million streams. It's certified platinum here in America, and she's maybe the opposite of Alfredo and Jacob in that I would credit the label for a lot of her success. She wanted to go the pop route, and the label put her on something like 17,000 playlists with the push of a button. And that essentially broke that song.
Technology has made it a lot easier and cheaper, at least, to record music. Do you think that it's sped up the process? Does it take less time to make an album or a great song than it used to?
It depends on the artist, going back to my catch-all. Jacob is able to sit in his bedroom and make music by himself and do everything by himself. And for him, yes, when Universal approaches us with the new Disney album, he can do a version of, did he do Under the Sea? I think he did Under the Sea in 8 hours, right? Doesn't even have to leave his house, and he gets it done for Disney and for Universal, in less than a day. So that is an example of it being sped up. You Don't Own Me was a song we worked on for 3 years. We had like 8 different versions. The first version that was brought to Quincy, he hated. The first version that brought to Quincy didn't have a rapper on it. The track ended up featuring G-Eazy, the big rapper now. That song took forever, and to be honest, I don't know that it would have come out had, and this is a tragedy, of course, Leslie Gore not died. And Leslie passed away, and all of us, including the label, kind of said, we got to release this song because we've been working on it for so long, and it's pretty good. So we released it the week of her death, and KCRW grabbed onto it, started playing it. Jason Bentley started spinning it. And it started working in Australia, in Grace's home country, and from there it just kind of traveled around the world.
You said that one of your artists has 250 dates on their next tour. How do you, as managers, make sure that your acts still have time to create music if they're making all of their money from being on the road?
It's a really good question. And the reason is because that specific artist and I just had like I flew to London to talk about that, essentially, because he was freaked out about it. He was saying, creation and writing music and creating content is what nourishes me. Being on tour, because it's so redundant, as much as I love interacting with the fans, by about the 100th of the same show, you're thinking, well, I want to play new material, but I can't because this is something where the booker has booked me to perform this crazy shit. He does his show with MIT, so it's this crazy technological show where he's a one-man band on stage. He's playing all the instruments, and MIT's programming it. You guys will see it in a TED Talk in about 2 weeks. And so after doing 100 of those, he gets sick of it, of course, and it becomes more and more mundane. And he was saying, I really need that. So again, it depends on the artist, but with him specifically, we're now intentionally carving out time so that he can write, so that he can be at home in his studio working. Because if he doesn't, the road's going to wear him down, and it'll be a problem.
Any questions from the audience? Yes.
Well, again, thank you. It was fascinating stories. One thing I wonder about when I hear the stories like the Collier story, viral YouTube. And so that means not just one entity, but lots of entities have access to this information. And so how can one make money using information that everybody has? Because it's a bidding war and so forth.
With Jacob, yes, he started out on YouTube and he started creating these videos that got tons and tons of plays. I hope I'm answering the right question here, but we'll see. And then we started by creating a Patreon page for his debut album. And it got to the point where he was making $20,000 per video that he made, because he has these fans who appreciate so much not only the music he creates, but the music theory he espouses. And because he was making $20,000 per video, as a manager, of course, I'm turning to him and saying, just make one video a week and we're making more than $1 million a year. That's all you have to do. Forget touring, forget writing music, forget everything, just make one video a week. But he didn't want to do that. You know, that doesn't fulfill him. And again, it goes kind of back to that argument that Marc was having about, you know, how you have to nourish the you know, what the artist wants, which is sometimes difficult. But, you know, getting back to your question, you have to be creative in how you monetize the free content. One of the things that's really annoying to me about working with Jacob is that so many of his viral videos aren't on his own channel on YouTube. And so therefore other people are monetizing him. But part of that is his desire that some of these videos aren't him showing his own music theory, for example, because he doesn't want to be perceived as being arrogant. And that's, you know, a very, you know, valid inclination on his part.
You explain to some people don't know what Patreon is.
Sure, yeah. Patreon is essentially a platform where if I'm a fan of an artist, I go on and I say, I'm going to give $1 or $2 or $10 or $100 for every metric, meaning like if you make the metric creating a video, then you say, as a fan, I'm going to give $2 for every video you make. And Jacob's metric was creating a video for YouTube, and basically for every video he made, all of these fans that had signed up would give a certain amount of money that they'd pledged. It's now back down to about $10,000 per video, but that's because we're, you know, way after the album cycle, and we did a lot of perks around the debut album to make it so that more and more people would sign up. He has this thing called I Harm You. I Harm You is this kind of viral video series where if you're a fan, you send in just a video of yourself singing a song, and then he'll take that video and create, you know, a 6 or 10 or 14-part harmony around your melody of him playing instruments and singing parts and stuff like that, and then he'll post it on his YouTube channel eventually, or on his Facebook page. And if you get a chance, go see that. I mean, I'm selling my own client, of course, in saying that, but that's the perfect example of how just outrageously talented this kid is.
Yeah.
I'll be loud. So what are you excited about in the future? The earlier speakers today are talking about, in some cases, an explosion of opportunity as the various spaces grow. With your clients and what you're doing, what excites you?
You know, to make money in the music space, I think you have to be creative. And there are a few projects, one of which I'm not allowed to talk about because we're in an SEC mandated quiet period, but of course you can Google it, that I'm very excited about. I'm very excited about our artists, you know, Jacob, Alfredo, the artists that I've just talked about. I think they have the best moments of their career ahead of them, and I feel very much involved in that, which is a privilege. And I'm really excited about kind of some of the ideas we as a team have. I can't emphasize enough how smart the people in the back of the room are, and they have things, you know, one of my employees that's sitting back there has been pushing to start an OTT network. And you may have seen recently that there's a lot of press about Quincy Jones starting an OTT network. He's been the champion of that for probably more than a year now, and I was even resistant to it at the beginning. But now that thing's starting to get press, it's starting to get signups, and again, you've got a guy named Quincy Jones who's 84 years old launching an OTT network over the top. So, you know, essentially like creating an SVOD network, subscription video, subscription, creating a Netflix-like platform for music content. You know, trying to drive subscription and serving on-demand video of special content. So,
just one more question. Are your artists making money from streaming services now? I mean, Marc talked about being very excited about the growth of streaming. How far away do you see that being before artists can rely on streaming revenue?
Right. Yeah. You know, I some of them are and some of them aren't. Right. you know, Alfredo Rodriguez, the avant-garde instrumental artist that I just spoke about, has close to 10 million streams of his new album on Spotify, and that's because of the playlists that he was able to get on. And I would say he's probably made more money from streaming than he has from CDs, despite the fact that he's in a CD-driven genre, jazz, or vinyl-driven genre, whatever you want to call it at this point. And so, yes, there are examples of our artists who are doing quite well on streaming, and then there are examples of others who lament the fact that streaming has come into play. But you know, what's funny is that when you play a live show, you have this really unique opportunity because you capture a moment with your fan, and that fan is in a different headspace than they are, you know, all other days of the year. And so, you know, our biggest merch item still, despite the fact that you see these charts that, you know, something like less than 20% of the market is CDs, our biggest merch item is still CDs. And they might not even be using them, but the audience is still buying the CD because they want the artist to sign something. It's really hard to sign a t-shirt. So they buy the CD and they make the artist sign the CD. And so it's still a very relevant thing for us.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.